There are places that should not still be standing. And yet, they remain. Waiting in silence, long after the last door was locked, long after the last light was turned off. If you are here for quiet horror, you are in the right place. Settle in. Breathe slowly. This is a calm story. There are no sudden sounds. Only a building that never truly emptied. I first saw the asylum from the road at dusk. It did not rise from the landscape the way ordinary buildings do. It seemed pressed into it, as if the earth had grown tired of holding it and was slowly trying to swallow it back. The windows were dark, the brick exterior worn pale by decades of weather, but nothing about it suggested ruin. It looked intact. Preserved. Like something that had been carefully kept rather than abandoned. The sign at the rusted gate still carried its name, though time had peeled away most of the letters. Wind moved gently through the tall grass surrounding the property, bending it in slow waves that never quite touched the steps leading inside. The grass leaned toward the building, not away from it. I parked further down the road than necessary. Not because I feared being seen. Because I did not want to arrive too directly. The front doors were heavy, reinforced glass framed by dull metal. One stood slightly ajar, not wide enough to suggest invitation, not narrow enough to suggest resistance. Just open enough to imply that something had once passed through and never bothered to close it. The air inside was cooler than outside, but not cold. It held a layered scent, old disinfectant, paper, something metallic, and beneath it all, the stillness of rooms that have not been interrupted in years. My footsteps echoed lightly across the tiled floor of the entry hall, but the echo did not travel far. It seemed absorbed by the corridor ahead, as if the building preferred to keep sound contained. The hallway stretched longer than logic allowed. That was my first clear thought. The dimensions of the exterior did not match the interior space. From the road, the structure appeared large but reasonable. Inside, the corridor extended in both directions with a quiet, deliberate symmetry that felt intentional. Doors lined each side, evenly spaced, each with a small rectangular window set at eye level. Every window was dark. I did not feel watched. Not yet. I moved slowly, not out of fear, but out of respect for the silence. The air in the corridor carried a faint hum, not electrical, not mechanical. A tonal presence that hovered just at the edge of perception, like distant ventilation that no longer functioned but had not forgotten how. Halfway down the hall, I stopped. The building had adjusted. There was no sound of movement. No visible change. And yet the space behind me felt subtly different from the space ahead. The air seemed denser, closer, as though the corridor had gently shortened without altering its length. I turned around. The entrance was still there. The doors still open. The dim gray light of evening still filtering inward. But the distance felt longer than before. I faced forward again. The hallway waited. It did not threaten. It did not beckon. It simply existed with a patience that felt older than neglect. Each closed door held the same expressionless posture, the small glass windows reflecting nothing but shadow. I approached the nearest one. The metal handle was colder than it should have been. Not cold from night air. Cold from absence. I did not open it. Instead, I leaned slightly closer to the narrow window and looked inside. The room beyond was empty. A bed frame bolted to the floor. A thin mattress. A chair against the far wall. The walls were a pale, faded color that might once have been intended to calm. The ceiling light fixture hung intact but lifeless. And yet the space did not feel unused. It felt paused. Like a breath held too long. I stepped back. The corridor had grown quieter. The faint hum in the air had lowered in tone, almost imperceptibly, as though something deep within the building had shifted its awareness. The sensation reminded me of the house. The way it had measured silence. The way it had responded without speaking. A thought arrived with quiet clarity. This place is not empty. It never was. A soft sound reached me then. Not from inside a room. From above. A measured step. Then another. The ceiling did not creak. The tiles did not tremble. The sound was too controlled for that. It moved with calm precision across the floor above me, slow and evenly spaced. Someone, or something, was walking the upper corridor. I did not feel panic. Only recognition. The rhythm was careful. Observant. As if the building itself were demonstrating something to me. The steps continued for several seconds, passing overhead in a straight line. They did not hurry. They did not hesitate. They crossed the length of the unseen hallway and then stopped. Directly above where I stood. The silence that followed was not empty. It was attentive. I did not look up. I understood already that sight would offer nothing useful. The presence above was not positioned there to be seen. It was positioned there to confirm something. The air in the corridor tightened gently, like fabric drawn closer around a frame. The faint hum lowered again, almost soothing now, as if the building were adjusting its breathing. And slowly, unmistakably, the same awareness I had felt in the house began to surface here. Not a ghost. Not a memory. A structure that remembered being inhabited. The difference was subtle but important. The house had remembered me. This place remembered everyone. Each door along the hallway felt heavier now, not physically, but atmospherically. Each small window seemed less like glass and more like an eye that had forgotten how to blink. The corridor did not feel narrow. It felt focused. Another step sounded above me. Just one. And in that single, measured movement, I understood something that had not occurred to me before. The asylum was not replaying its past. It was maintaining it. The footsteps overhead did not echo. They did not fade. They existed with steady clarity, as though time inside this building had been folded rather than lost. I exhaled slowly. The air responded. Not by moving. By settling. The corridor accepted the sound of my breath the way the house had accepted my voice, absorbing it without disturbance. The hum softened further, almost blending with the rhythm of my pulse. I was not intruding. I was being placed. The realization came gently. This building did not react to visitors. It arranged them. Behind me, somewhere far down the corridor, a door gave the faintest click. Not opening. Not closing. Just adjusting within its frame. The sound was precise. Measured. Deliberate. And the steps above shifted once more, repositioning slightly, aligning with the space below. With me. The building was not observing from a single point. It was observing from all of them. I stood in the center of the hallway and felt the architecture align around my presence, not aggressively, not urgently, carefully. The asylum had not been abandoned. It had been preserved in expectation. Of someone. Of something. Of recognition. The faint hum deepened, not louder, but fuller, resonating softly through the walls. The doors remained closed. The lights remained dark. The corridor remained still. But the awareness had expanded. And in that widening silence, with the footsteps above and the patient structure around me, one quiet certainty settled into place. This building knew the house. And it knew me because of it. The asylum was built in 1931. I did not know that when I stepped inside. I learned it later, from a rusted plaque half hidden behind overgrown ivy near the eastern wing. But even before I saw the date, I felt it, the weight of decades arranged carefully inside brick and tile, not decaying, not collapsing, simply continuing. It had closed in 1987. That detail mattered. Because places that are abandoned abruptly tend to unravel. They loosen. They give themselves back to weather and neglect. This building had not unraveled. It had sealed. The corridor still held the symmetry of intention. The doors still aligned with institutional precision. The air still carried that faint tonal hum, lower now, almost settling into the background of my thoughts. I began walking again. Each step echoed softly, but the echo never outran me. It followed close, contained, as though the hallway preferred sound to remain near its source. The lights overhead were long dead, yet a dim gray illumination lingered, directionless and steady, enough to define shapes without offering comfort. Room numbers remained beside each door, small metal plates secured with screws that had not rusted as much as they should have. 112. 113. 114. The numbers did not feel sequential. They felt archival. I paused beside room 117. The glass pane in the door reflected nothing clearly, only the long corridor behind me, stretching into soft distortion. For a moment, the reflection appeared slightly delayed, as though the image were arriving a fraction of a second too late. I leaned closer. Inside, the room was identical to the first I had seen. Bed, chair, bolted fixtures. But this one felt occupied. Not physically. Structurally. The air beyond the glass looked denser, faintly layered, like multiple moments resting in the same space without fully overlapping. My breathing slowed instinctively. I did not want to disturb whatever equilibrium existed inside that room. The hum in the corridor shifted again. Slightly warmer. Almost receptive. A memory from the house returned then, the sensation of being measured against something preserved. The careful comparison between who I was and who I had been. This building did not measure individuals. It measured impressions. A soft movement sounded at the far end of the hallway. Not footsteps this time. A door opening gently, somewhere out of sight. The sound was distant but precise, the quiet hinge movement of metal long unused yet perfectly functional. I turned my head slowly, following the corridor's narrowing perspective toward the source. No door appeared open. Every frame remained closed. Every window dark. Yet the sound had existed. I was certain of it. The asylum did not replay events as echoes. It sustained them as possibilities. I stepped back from room 117 and continued forward. The corridor seemed longer now than before, though I could not identify where the extension had occurred. The proportions remained mathematically consistent, yet distance felt elastic, stretching subtly with each measured step. Halfway down the hall, I noticed something new. The hum had found rhythm. Very faint. Almost indistinguishable. But present. Not mechanical. Breathing. Not a single breath. Many. Layered so delicately they formed a tonal field rather than individual sounds. The air carried it without movement, like a cord held indefinitely by invisible lungs. I stopped walking. The breathing did not stop. It did not intensify either. It remained steady, neutral, as though unaware that I had noticed. The awareness in the building deepened. Not focused on me directly, but adjusting around me, recalibrating the architecture of silence. The doors along the hallway seemed less like barriers now and more like membranes, thin partitions separating spaces that were not entirely separate. I became aware of something else. The floor beneath me felt stable, but not solitary. As though the surface supported more weight than my own. The thought did not alarm me. It clarified something. The footsteps above from earlier had not been random. They had been positional. The building had been aligning. Slowly, without urgency, I turned toward the nearest staircase at the end of the corridor. It descended slightly before rising again, a split-level design common in older institutions. The railing was metal, cool to the touch, carrying the same preserved temperature as the door handles. As I placed my hand upon it, the hum shifted once more. This time, it lowered in tone, not fading, but deepening, like a choir adjusting its pitch to match a new note. Mine. The realization came quietly. This place did not react to sound. It reacted to presence. The house had remembered me. The asylum was remembering through me. The difference was subtle, but significant. In the house, I had felt recognized. Here, I felt integrated. The staircase did not creak as I stepped upward. The building did not complain about my movement. Instead, the layered breathing seemed to redistribute, shifting slightly above, as though preparing the upper floor to receive me. Halfway up, I paused. A faint flicker passed across the corridor below. Not light. Density. Like the brief compression of air where someone stands for too long in one place. And in that flicker, I understood something the plaque outside had not explained. The asylum had not been closed because it failed. It had been closed because it no longer required supervision. The structure maintained its own order now. Above me, a single measured step sounded again. Then silence. But not absence. Expectation. I resumed climbing. Each step upward felt less like ascent and more like entry into a layer that had always existed just above perception. The air grew marginally warmer, not from heat, but from proximity, the way space feels when it has been occupied continuously without interruption. At the top of the stairs, the corridor mirrored the one below. Identical doors. Identical symmetry. Identical stillness. And yet the atmosphere here was different. Denser. More complete. The layered breathing was clearer now, no longer a tonal field but a subtle oscillation in the air, rising and falling in unified cadence. Not distressed. Not restless. Sustained. I stepped into the upper corridor. The building adjusted around me, almost imperceptibly, as though a final alignment had been achieved. And in that quiet recalibration, standing between two mirrored hallways suspended somewhere between 1931 and now, I felt the same certainty I had felt in the house. This place was not haunted. It was continuous. And I had just stepped into the part of it that never stopped breathing. The upper corridor did not greet me. It did not shift. It did not hum louder. It did not rearrange its silence the way the lower level had. Instead, it remained perfectly composed, as if this floor required less adjustment. As if it had been expecting me from the beginning. The air felt thicker here. Not heavy, structured. Like space that had been organized carefully and left undisturbed for decades. The layered breathing I had sensed below was clearer now, but still unified, still balanced. It did not belong to any one room. It belonged to the architecture itself. I walked forward slowly. Room numbers resumed in sequence, though I was no longer certain they followed logic. 201. 202. 203. The metal plates beside each door were slightly more polished here, as if touched more often, though no dust marked the handles. I stopped at room 208. Something about it felt different. Not louder. Not colder. More defined. I stood in front of the narrow window and looked through. The room was larger than the others. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. A desk stood against the far wall. A second chair faced it. The bed was positioned slightly farther from the corner, angled in a way that implied conversation rather than confinement. The air inside that room did not appear layered. It appeared still. Not paused, complete. My reflection in the glass seemed closer than it should have been, as though the corridor behind me had shortened again. For a moment, I had the faint impression that someone stood just over my shoulder. I did not turn. I had learned that turning rarely revealed anything useful. Instead, I listened. The layered breathing shifted subtly, concentrating around this room. The tonal field narrowed, deepened, harmonized into something quieter but more intentional. The building was not reacting. It was focusing. A faint sound emerged from inside room 208. Not footsteps. Not movement. Paper. A slow, deliberate slide of paper across wood. The sound was unmistakable, the soft drag of a document being repositioned on a desk. My pulse slowed. Not from fear. From recognition. The asylum was not replaying random memories. It was replaying structured ones. I leaned slightly closer to the glass. The desk remained empty. The chair remained vacant. But the sound of paper had existed. And the air inside the room held a different density now, compressed, as if something unseen occupied the space between chair and desk, leaning forward slightly. Listening. The hum throughout the corridor lowered again, and with it, the layered breathing softened into near silence. The entire upper floor felt as though it were narrowing toward this single room. Room 208 was not a patient's room. It was an office. A place of observation. Of assessment. Of records. The realization settled carefully into my thoughts. The house had remembered me. This building recorded others. And here, in this room, something was still recording. The air grew marginally warmer near the doorframe. Not heat. Presence. A faint alignment behind me suggested that the corridor itself had shifted its attention toward the glass. Not watching the room. Watching me watching it. The sensation was precise. I was not the subject. I was the reference. A memory surfaced then, the plaque outside, the year 1931. The closing date, 1987. Institutions like this did not simply end. They transferred records. They archived histories. They stored observations in boxes and cabinets and distant facilities. Unless the building itself had become the archive. The faint sound of paper came again. Closer this time. Followed by something even softer. Breathing. Not layered. Singular. Measured. Just inside the room. My reflection in the glass shifted a fraction to the left, a distortion in angle, nothing more, yet it created the impression that someone inside was adjusting their posture in response to my stillness. The corridor behind me did not move. But I felt its awareness deepen. The asylum was not interested in frightening me. It was interested in continuity. And continuity required documentation. A subtle pressure formed at the center of my back, not touching, but aligning, as if positioning me in front of the glass with quiet precision. I understood then. Room 208 had once been used to observe patients. Now it observed the observer. The hum returned faintly, but altered, less breath-like, more tonal, as though the architecture itself were recalibrating its memory against my presence. The house had measured whether I still fit. The asylum was measuring how I connected. Between two buildings separated by distance, decades, and purpose, there was a shared awareness. A shared system. Not of haunting. Of preservation. The air inside room 208 compressed once more, just slightly, and the faintest indentation appeared in the dust on the desk surface, a narrow line, as if the edge of a paper had been pressed down and lifted again. A record made. Not written in ink. Stored in structure. I stepped back slowly. The corridor exhaled. Not audibly. Structurally. The layered breathing resumed across the upper floor, gentle and even. The focus around room 208 widened, dissolving into the broader awareness of the building. But something had changed. The atmosphere felt resolved. As though an entry had been completed. And in that quiet resolution, standing in front of a room that no longer needed to prove its purpose, I felt a calm certainty settle into place. The asylum did not remember people. It remembered connections. And somewhere, in the quiet space between this building and the house that had once measured me, something had just been updated. I was no longer simply returning. I was being archived. I did not leave room 208 immediately. There was no urgency in the building, no pressure to move. The air had returned to its balanced rhythm, the layered breathing steady again, dispersed evenly across the corridor. Whatever had just been recorded did not require confirmation. It had been accepted. I turned slowly and continued down the upper hallway. The symmetry remained flawless. Each door aligned with quiet precision. Each narrow window held only shadow. Yet the space no longer felt as though it were testing me. It felt as though it had made a decision. The sensation was subtle but undeniable. I was no longer being assessed. I was being placed. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed something new along the wall, a recessed alcove I had not seen before. It held a long glass panel, dark and reflective, set into the brick like a display case without contents. I stepped closer. The glass did not reflect the hallway correctly. It showed the corridor but not as it was now. The lights above were faintly illuminated in the reflection. The walls appeared slightly brighter, less worn. The metal plates beside the doors gleamed. And at the far end of the reflected hallway, a figure stood. Not detailed. Not fully formed. A presence defined only by the distortion of space around it. I did not feel fear. The figure was not positioned to approach. It was positioned to observe. I shifted slightly to the right. The reflection adjusted half a second later. Not perfectly synchronized. Delayed. As though the surface were not a mirror but a window, showing a corridor from another moment in time. The layered breathing in the air softened again, concentrating around the glass panel. The building was not hiding the distortion. It was allowing it. I moved closer still, until my own reflection nearly merged with the darker shape at the far end of the hall. The distance between us appeared shorter than it should have been. The figure did not move. But the corridor in the glass felt occupied. The year returned to my thoughts. An institution built to contain what could not be easily understood. But what if it had contained something else entirely? What if the architecture itself had been designed to preserve states of mind, to hold impressions in place long enough for observation? The house had remembered me as an individual. This place remembered conditions. Silence. Breathing. Observation. Presence. The figure in the glass shifted slightly, not walking, not stepping, but aligning its posture as though acknowledging my proximity. The delay in the reflection shortened. The glass was calibrating. I became aware of something else then. My own outline in the panel was faintly doubled, as though two versions of me stood there, one closer to the surface, one slightly behind, separated by the smallest distortion of light. The building was not showing me a ghost. It was showing me continuity. A soft sound traveled through the upper floor. Not a footstep. Not a door. A tone. Single. Clear. Resonant. It vibrated through the walls with gentle authority, like a bell struck once in a distant room. The layered breathing stilled for a moment in response. The figure in the glass did not disappear. It stepped forward. Just enough to merge with my reflection. For a fraction of a second, the two outlines aligned perfectly. And in that alignment, I understood. The asylum was not separate from the house. They were part of the same structure of memory. One preserved individuals. The other preserved environments. Together, they sustained continuity. The tone faded slowly. The reflection corrected itself. The lights in the glass dimmed back into darkness. The corridor returned to its worn stillness. And the alcove appeared empty once more, only a sheet of dark glass set into brick. I stepped back. The building did not resist. It did not tighten. It did not test. It had integrated what it needed. The layered breathing resumed gently around me, and the upper hallway felt wider now, less concentrated. The observation had concluded. But as I turned toward the staircase, preparing to descend, a final quiet realization settled into place. The house had remembered me because I had once lived within it. The asylum remembered me because I had once been recorded. And somewhere between those two preserved structures, a system existed that did not forget. I began walking back toward the stairs. This time, the corridor did not stretch. It did not distort. It allowed me to move through it without adjustment. But the awareness remained. Not watching. Maintaining. And deep within the architecture, beneath brick and tile and decades of preserved silence, something had quietly linked the two places together in a way that felt permanent. I had entered as a visitor. I was leaving as an entry. The staircase felt shorter on the way down. Not because the steps had changed, but because the building no longer needed to measure my movement. Each footfall landed softly, absorbed into the structure without echo. The layered breathing had stabilized again, evenly distributed across both floors, as if the upper corridor had released its focus and returned to the whole. When I reached the lower level, the hallway did not appear distorted anymore. The doors aligned naturally. The distance remained consistent. The air held its low, steady hum. The asylum had stopped adjusting. That was the difference. Earlier, the space had felt elastic, outstretching, compressing, recalibrating around my presence. Now it felt settled. Complete. Like a system that had finished updating. I walked toward the far end of the corridor, toward the section I had not yet explored. The numbers on the doors descended now, 116, 115, 114, though I was certain I had walked past those earlier in the opposite direction. The architecture was not linear. It was cyclical. Halfway down, I noticed a faint glow beneath one of the doors. Not bright. Not electrical. Just a subtle softening of darkness at the bottom edge of room 109. The glow did not flicker. It remained steady, muted, like the suggestion of lamplight filtered through heavy curtains. I approached slowly. The layered breathing in the corridor narrowed again, not as intensely as before, but with quiet awareness. The building recognized that I had recognized something. I stopped in front of the door. The metal handle was warmer now than any I had touched earlier. Not warm from use. Warm from continuity. The faint glow beneath the door pulsed once, almost imperceptibly, in rhythm with the tonal hum of the building. I did not hesitate this time. I turned the handle. The door opened without resistance. The room inside was larger than the others, similar to the one upstairs, not a patient's room, but a shared space. The walls carried the same pale institutional color, but here the air felt softer, less compressed. In the center of the room stood a long wooden table. Around it, several empty chairs. And at the far wall, a tall cabinet with glass doors. The faint glow came from within that cabinet. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a quiet, deliberate click, not trapping, not locking, simply completing the space. The layered breathing outside the room faded to near silence. Inside, the air was different. Still. Focused. I approached the cabinet. Behind the glass were folders. Dozens of them. Neatly arranged. Labeled. The labels were faded, but visible enough to read. Names. Dates. Observations. Each folder carried the weight of documentation, of people once studied, once recorded, once preserved in structured memory. My eyes scanned the rows slowly. Some names felt ordinary. Some felt unfamiliar. And then, near the center shelf, I saw something that did not belong to the era of the building's operation. A folder labeled with a date far more recent than 1987. I did not open the cabinet immediately. The air around it felt calibrated, like the upper corridor had been, attentive but calm. The building was not concealing this. It was presenting it. I reached forward and pulled the glass door open. The hinges moved without sound. I took the folder gently from the shelf. It was thinner than the others. Lighter. The label carried only a single word. My last name. No first name. Just the family name. The same name tied to the house. My pulse did not spike. It slowed. The continuity was complete. I opened the folder. Inside were not papers. Not photographs. Not inked observations. There were blank pages. Perfectly blank. But as I held them, the faintest impressions began to surface across the surface, not written in text, but in subtle indentations. Like pressure marks. Like the outline of memory pressed into paper without ink. The layered breathing returned faintly outside the room, responding not with tension but with balance. The asylum did not store stories. It stored imprints. And the house had already begun creating mine. The blank pages felt warm in my hands. Not with heat. With alignment. The glow from within the cabinet dimmed slightly, as if the act of retrieval had completed a necessary exchange. I closed the folder gently and returned it to its place on the shelf. The glass door shut without sound. The glow disappeared entirely. The room returned to neutral stillness. I turned toward the door. It opened before I touched it. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just enough to allow exit. The corridor outside had returned to perfect symmetry. No distortion. No elastic distance. No measured adjustment. The asylum had finished what it needed. As I stepped back into the hallway, the layered breathing resumed evenly across both floors, subtle and unified. The building did not need to observe further. It had linked the archive. And somewhere, far beyond these walls, perhaps within the quiet structure of the house, a corresponding adjustment had already been made. I walked slowly toward the exit. The front doors remained slightly open, the evening light dimmer now, leaning toward night. Behind me, the corridor did not stretch. It did not shorten. It simply remained. Preserved. Continuous. And aware that my entry was no longer temporary. The evening outside had deepened into that quiet hour when the sky no longer decides whether it belongs to day or night. The grass surrounding the asylum moved gently in the wind, but the building itself remained perfectly still behind me, its windows dark, reflective, unreadable. I did not look back immediately. There was no need. The continuity did not end at the doorway. It extended outward, subtle and structural, like an unseen thread stretched between brick and wood, between this place and the house waiting miles away. I stepped onto the cracked pavement beyond the entrance. The air felt thinner outside, less layered. The faint tonal hum that had filled the corridors no longer surrounded me, yet something quieter remained, a residual alignment in my thoughts, a calm awareness that did not belong entirely to me. The asylum was not watching. It did not need to. It had recorded what it required. As I reached my car, I paused with my hand on the door handle. For a moment, I felt the faintest pressure at my back, not from the building, not from the wind, but from something more abstract. A subtle recalibration, like the final adjustment of a lens after focus has been achieved. I understood then that the archive was not confined to rooms or folders. It existed in connection. The house had measured me. The asylum had documented the measurement. Together, they formed a closed system, one that did not forget individuals, and did not release impressions once formed. I drove away slowly. The road leading from the property curved through sparse trees, their silhouettes dark against the fading sky. In the rearview mirror, the asylum appeared smaller with distance, yet it did not feel diminished. It felt stable. Complete. The building did not shrink into irrelevance as I left. It remained proportionate to something internal, an awareness that had settled quietly within me. By the time I reached the highway, the hum was gone entirely. But the alignment remained. The drive home was uneventful. Streetlights passed overhead in steady intervals. Other cars moved in the opposite direction, ordinary and unaware. The world beyond those preserved structures continued as it always had, fluid, distracted, temporary. The house stood at the end of its narrow road, exactly as before. The porch light remained off. The windows dark. The trees leaned inward in their patient posture. I parked and sat for a moment without turning off the engine. The house did not feel different. It felt synchronized. When I stepped out of the car and approached the door, the air around the property carried the same faint coolness it always had, not cold, not threatening, simply observant. I unlocked the door. This time, the key did not resist. Inside, the hallway welcomed me with its familiar stillness. The floorboards shifted softly beneath my weight, the wood adjusting in quiet acknowledgement. But something had changed. The silence was no longer measuring. It was aware of completion. I walked slowly toward the sitting room. The table where the clean oval had once appeared now held an even layer of dust. No interruption. No absence. But as I passed the mirror at the end of the hallway, I noticed something subtle. My reflection aligned perfectly. No delay. No distortion. Yet behind me, in the depth of the glass, the faintest suggestion of a corridor extended beyond the visible wall, longer than the house should allow. Not detailed. Not bright. Just a suggestion of depth that did not belong to this structure alone. I did not stop to examine it. I understood already. The house had not expanded physically. It had connected. Upstairs, the floorboard outside my bedroom gave a soft, deliberate creak. Not testing. Not approaching. Acknowledging. The system was intact. I moved toward the stairs slowly, listening to the steady quiet around me. The air carried no layered breathing here, no tonal hum. The house did not need to replicate the asylum's function. It only needed to maintain continuity. Halfway up the stairs, I paused. For a moment, I felt two distinct spaces align, the narrow hallway of the house and the symmetrical corridor of the asylum. Not overlapping physically, but resonating in structure, like two notes vibrating at the same frequency. And in that resonance, a final understanding settled gently into place. These places were not haunted. They were deliberate. Built, or perhaps shaped, to preserve impressions across distance and time. The house remembered who I was. The asylum remembered how I connected. Together, they ensured that nothing was ever entirely lost. I reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the hallway. The air was calm. The silence steady. But now it carried something new. Not attention. Not measurement. Continuity. And somewhere within that quiet alignment between two preserved structures, something subtle had begun to extend beyond them, outward, patient, searching for the next place that should not remember. To be continued.